"Don't make this harder," she whispered in my cabin. But I did it anyway and shocked my whole town. The town was small, the kind of place where everyone knew everyone else's business. The streets were quiet, lined with old maple trees that turned gold and red in the fall, and the houses all had that familiar, slightly worn look that made them feel like they had been part of the town forever. Life here moved slowly. People went about their routines, and surprises were rare. But for some, quiet towns were the perfect place to hide a little spark of excitement. He had lived here most of his life, and while he liked the comfort of familiar faces and predictable days, he also had a part of him that wanted more. He had always been curious, a little reckless, and he loved testing boundaries. It wasn't that he was careless. He just liked to feel alive in ways that didn't always fit the ordinary rhythm of his town. For most people, weekends were for chores, movies, or sitting on the porch with coffee. For him, weekends were chances to see what could happen if he just stepped a little outside the rules. Nothing dangerous, just thrilling enough to make his pulse race. She had been his friend for years, someone he had known since childhood. They had grown up in the same neighborhood, shared school lunches, and swapped secrets that they would later regret or laugh about. Over time, their friendship had grown deeper, although it had always stayed in the safe zone of companionship. A friendship built on trust, jokes, and shared memories. But there had always been something unspoken between them, a tension that neither of them fully addressed. It wasn't romantic, at least not in the obvious sense, but there was a sense that they understood each other in ways no one else could. One chilly Friday afternoon, as autumn winds rustled the leaves outside, she sent him a message. It was short, casual, but it carried a spark of excitement. "Hey, want to come up to the cabin this weekend? Just to relax? Get away from everything?" You know, the usual. The cabin. That word alone made his heart beat a little faster. It wasn't a fancy place. In fact, it was old, tucked away deep in the forested hills outside of town. Most people didn't go there much, partly because it was far from the main road, and partly because the woods could feel a little eerie, especially at night. But that was exactly why it appealed to him. A place hidden from everyone. A place where the rules of the town didn't feel so strict.
He didn't hesitate.
"Sure," he replied. "I'll bring snacks." By Friday evening, he was packing his bag. He tossed in clothes, a flashlight, some energy bars, and a small notebook he liked to carry on trips. Sometimes he wrote, sometimes he just sketched ideas or random thoughts. Breath. His parents had warned him once about going too deep into the hills, but they knew him well enough to know he wasn't reckless in a way that would get him hurt. Still, part of him felt that familiar thrill, the kind that comes from doing something slightly daring, something that made the heart beat a little faster just because it was unknown. The drive to the cabin wasn't long, maybe 40 minutes if the roads were clear, but it felt longer because the forest seemed to close in around him. The sunlight was fading as he drove, golden and soft, painting the trees in streaks of orange and red. The town disappeared behind him, and with it the feeling of being watched or judged. Here, in the middle of the hills, the only sounds were the hum of his car and the occasional call of a bird returning to its nest. When he finally arrived, she was waiting outside the cabin, leaning casually against a wooden railing of the porch. The cabin itself was charming in a rustic way. Logs stacked neatly, a stone chimney curling smoke into the cool air, and a small deck that looked out over a valley filled with trees. The smell of pine was strong and comforting. "Hey," he said, stepping out of the car. "Hey," she replied, a little nervous but smiling. "Glad you came." They unloaded the car together, carrying the bags inside. The cabin was warm, lit by soft lamps that made the wooden walls glow. It smelled faintly of cedar and old books, a mix that somehow felt cozy and exciting at the same time. For a while they just sat and talked. She told him about small things from her week, and he shared a story from work. Laughter came easily, the kind that felt good and natural, and for a moment it felt like the world outside the cabin didn't exist. Bah. Then, as the evening deepened and the forest grew darker outside the windows, she leaned back against the cushions on the couch. Her voice dropped to a whisper, barely audible, yet charged with tension. "Don't make this harder," she said. He froze for a moment. Her words were calm, almost gentle, but they carried weight, an unspoken warning that made the hair on the back of his neck stand up. He didn't ask her to explain. There was something in her tone that made him understand she was serious, even if he couldn't see exactly why. Part of him wanted to stop, to take a step back and just enjoy the quiet warmth of the cabin, the safety of the woods around them. But another part, the part that always craved a challenge, a thrill, something new, whispered in his mind. What if this is exactly what I'm supposed to do? He looked at her, studied her face. She wasn't angry or afraid. She was cautious, almost teasing, like she was daring him without saying it outright. That glance alone was enough to make his heart beat faster. For the rest of the evening, they moved around the cabin, making simple dinner, playing a card game, and telling stories of their childhood adventures. The tension lingered under the surface, a current of electricity that made everything feel more alive. He found himself glancing at her from time to time, wondering what she had meant, feeling both excited and a little anxious. Night fell fully, and the cabin was quiet, except for the soft crackling of the fireplace. Deus. He sat by the window looking out at the dark forest, listening to the wind in the trees. Every so often, he heard a branch snap or a distant animal moving, and it reminded him that out here, away from the town, the rules were different. Out here, he felt free. She joined him at the window after a while, standing quietly beside him. No words were spoken at first. The air was filled with unspoken possibilities, the kind that made time stretch and every small sound feel amplified. He felt her presence keenly, as if it made the night itself more intense. Then, almost in passing, she said again, her voice soft but firm, "Don't make this harder." He understood that her words weren't just a warning. They were a test, a challenge, a moment that would mark something important between them. He didn't know exactly what would happen next, but he felt certain that whatever choice he made now would change the evening, maybe even the friendship, forever. He stayed there, staring out at the dark forest, thinking about the rules he had always lived by, the limits he had tested before, and the curiosity that always got the better of him. And for the first time in a long time he felt that familiar rush, the thrill of standing on the edge of something unknown. Something exciting, something that could shock not just himself, but everyone in his quiet little town. By the time they finally went to bed, the tension hadn't fully eased. It lingered in the air, in the flickering shadows on the walls, in the way he couldn't quite look at her without remembering her whisper. He lay awake for hours, thinking about choices, consequences, and that thrilling, dangerous part of life that he had always sought. And deep down he knew, whatever happened next, it would be unforgettable. The morning sunlight spilled through the small windows of the cabin, painting the wooden floor in warm golden stripes. He woke up with the sounds of birds singing outside and the faint rustle of the wind in the trees. The previous night still lingered in his mind, her words echoing softly. "Don't make this harder."
He could feel the tension in his chest, a mix of excitement and nervousness.
Part of him wanted to forget it, to pretend it had just been a harmless whisper. But he couldn't. That little warning had unsettled him in a way he wasn't used to, and it made his heart beat faster even now. She was already awake, sitting on the small balcony with a cup of steaming coffee in her hands. The morning air was crisp, and she had wrapped herself in a thick sweater. Her eyes caught his when he stepped out of the bedroom, and she smiled lightly, but there was a seriousness there too. It made him realize she was already thinking about what she had said last night. "Morning," he said, trying to sound casual. "Morning," she replied, her voice soft. "Did you sleep well?" "Yeah," he said, rubbing the sleep from his eyes. "You?" She nodded, taking a sip of coffee. There was a quiet moment as they both looked out over the valley. The forest stretched for miles, untouched and peaceful, and yet it somehow made him feel like the world outside the cabin didn't matter. Out here, he realized, anything could happen. Breakfast was simple: eggs, toast, and fruit. They talked casually about the town, old friends, and funny memories from school. It was normal, comfortable, almost ordinary, but underneath the surface, the tension from the previous night was still there, like a thread ready to pull at any moment. Every glance, every small movement seemed to carry meaning.
After breakfast, she suggested they take a walk around the property. The forest surrounding the cabin was dense but beautiful.
Brace. Sunlight filtered through the branches, creating patterns on the ground. The smell of pine was strong, fresh, and almost intoxicating. As they walked, he felt the thrill of being somewhere so private, far away from the eyes of the town. The rules felt different here. "Be careful on the trail," she said as they started down a narrow path. "Some of the ground is loose, and there are rocks hidden under the leaves." He smiled, feeling a rush of excitement. Part of him loved the idea of danger, even small danger. It made him feel alive, more aware of everything around him. The forest felt like a place where normal life didn't apply, a place where he could take a risk just to see what would happen. As they walked, they talked about small things at first: favorite books, movies, and childhood memories. Right. Then, as they reached a small clearing near a stream, the conversation slowed. The quiet of the forest surrounded them, and the sound of water flowing over rocks filled the air. Right. She sat on a fallen log and gestured for him to sit beside her. "Do you remember last summer," she began, "when we tried to build that treehouse in my backyard? We thought we were going to fall off the ladder at least 10 times. He laughed, remembering the fear and excitement of that day. "Yeah, and your brother caught us before we actually did. I thought he would tell our parents and we'd be in big trouble." Breath. She smiled at the memory, but then her expression changed, becoming serious again. "Sometimes you like to take risks just to see what will happen. Am I wrong?"
He paused.
He was true. He had always been curious, always been tempted to push boundaries. "Maybe," he admitted, "but it's not just for fun. I guess I just want to feel alive, you know? Sometimes everything in town feels so predictable, safe, boring." She nodded, as if she understood perfectly. "I know what you mean," she said quietly. "But sometimes the thrill isn't worth the consequences." Breath. "That's why I said what I said last night. Don't make this harder." He felt a shiver run down his spine.
Her words weren't just a warning anymore. They were a challenge. And challenges were something he had always struggled to resist.
They continued walking, and soon the conversation drifted to lighter topics. But every step he took, every glance at her, reminded him of her warning. It lingered in his mind like a shadow he couldn't shake.
He wondered what exactly she meant, and why she had said it in such a quiet, serious tone.
By midday, they returned to the cabin. The air was warm now and sunlight streamed through the windows. They decided to rest for a while. He sat on the couch, feeling the soft cushions beneath him, and she poured them both a glass of juice. They didn't speak much at first, The quiet between them was comfortable, but also tense. He knew the moment from the night before wasn't over. Best. Finally, she spoke. "There's something I want to show you," she said, a hint of excitement in her voice. He looked up, curious. "What is it? What is it?" "You'll see," she said, standing up. "It's outside, but you'll need to be careful." He followed her to the back of the cabin. There was a small wooden deck that overlooked a steep slope leading down to the forest. She led him to a rope swing tied to a tall tree branch that stretched over the edge. "I made this last summer," she explained. "I thought it would be fun, but I never really had the courage to use it myself. Do you want to try?" He looked at the swing, then back at her. His heart started to race. The drop was higher than he expected, and the idea of swinging over the forest floor was thrilling and terrifying at the same time. Part of him wanted to say no, to respect her unspoken warning. But another part of him, the part that loved excitement and challenges, whispered, "Go for it." She stepped aside, giving him space. "Just be careful," she said softly, almost repeating her warning from last night. He took a deep breath, gripped the rope, and swung out over the edge. The wind rushed past his face, and for a moment it felt like he was flying. The forest below seemed endless, the world stretching out in every direction. "Dispew," he laughed, a pure, exhilarated sound that echoed through the trees.
When he landed safely back on the ground, his heart was pounding and adrenaline surged through him.
She laughed, too, a light, carefree sound, and he realized that she had been hoping he would take the risk. "You actually did it," she said, shaking her head in amazement. "I didn't think you would." He grinned, feeling a mix of pride and relief. But deep down, he knew this was just the beginning. The rope swing was thrilling, yes, but the tension between them, the unspoken challenge from last night, still hung in the air. Whatever came next would be even more intense, even more unforgettable. They spent the rest of the afternoon exploring the property, climbing small hills and discovering hidden paths through the forest. The world outside the cabin seemed to disappear entirely. Out here, there were no rules, no judgment, just the thrill of the unknown. As the sun began to set, painting the sky in shades of pink and orange, they returned to the cabin. The warm glow of the fireplace awaited them, and the quiet comfort of the cabin felt even more inviting. But the memory of her whispered warning lingered. He couldn't shake the feeling that whatever they had begun that morning was only the first step in something bigger, something that could change the way they saw each other, and maybe even the town. He sat quietly by the fire that evening, staring into the flames. Every crackle seemed to echo the tension in his chest. She joined him, sitting close but not touching, and handed him a cup of tea. The warmth spread through his hands, but it didn't calm the excitement he felt inside. Her eyes met his, and for a moment, neither of them spoke. The forest outside was dark now, filled with the quiet sounds of night, but inside, the air was electric, charged with anticipation. But Sachi went, "Don't make this harder," and realized that she wasn't just talking about the swing or even the day. She was talking about something much deeper, something that would test him in ways he had never experienced before. He didn't know exactly what she meant yet, but one thing was certain. He was ready to find out. The next morning the cabin was quiet again, but the tension from the previous day still lingered. He woke up earlier than usual, the sunlight barely touching the floor, and he could hear the soft hum of the forest outside. She was already awake, sitting at the small kitchen table with her notebook and pen, scribbling something quietly. He watched her for a moment, noticing the way her brow was slightly furrowed in concentration, the way her hair fell softly across her face. There was something different about her this morning, a seriousness that made his pulse quicken. "Morning," he said, trying to sound calm, though inside he felt a mix of excitement and nervousness. "Morning," she replied, looking up briefly and smiling faintly. "Did you, she sleep well?" "Yeah," he said. "You." The air between them felt charged, almost electric, and he realized that the words from the night before were still hanging in the room. "Don't make this harder." He didn't know exactly what she meant, but he felt certain that whatever happened today would be different. After a simple breakfast of toast, fruit, and juice, she suggested they explore a part of the forest they hadn't seen before. It wasn't far from the cabin, but it was a place few people in town ever went, a hidden trail that led to a small cliff overlooking the valley. She said it was beautiful and peaceful, and he could see the excitement in her eyes as she spoke. The walk was quiet at first, each step crunching softly on the forest floor. The air smelled of pine and earth, crisp and fresh, and the sunlight peeked through the branches in warm, golden streaks. They walked side by side, neither speaking much, both feeling the tension that had been building since the first whispered words the night before. Eventually, they reached the cliff. The view was breathtaking. The valley stretched out endlessly, covered in trees that glowed with autumn colors, and the river below sparkled in the sunlight. He felt a rush of adrenaline just standing there, looking out over the edge. She turned to him, her expression serious. "I wanted to show you this because, well, I wanted you to see it before anything else happens." He looked at her, curious. "Before anything else?" She nodded.
Yes, yes.
"You need to understand that some things are beautiful, but they also require courage. And today, you're going to need courage." He felt his stomach tighten. The words carried a weight he couldn't ignore. He didn't know exactly what she meant, but he trusted her. And deep down, he knew that whatever challenge lay ahead would be the kind that could change everything. She led him to a narrow path that descended from the cliff. The ground was uneven, covered with leaves and loose rocks. He had to be careful with every step. She held out her hand to him, and he took it without hesitation, feeling the warmth of her grip and the electricity of the moment. As they walked, she explained what they were doing. There was an old rope bridge spanning a small ravine hidden deep in the forest. Few people dared to cross it because it was high, swayed with the wind, and looked fragile. But the view from the other side was said to be incredible, a secret spot that very few in the town had ever seen. He looked at the bridge from a distance, his heart pounding. It did look scary. The ropes were worn, the planks uneven, and the gap below was enough to make anyone nervous. He could feel the thrill in his chest, the mix of fear and excitement that he had always loved.
"Are you sure we should do this?" he asked, his voice betraying a hint of hesitation.
She smiled, a mixture of challenge and encouragement.
"It's perfectly safe if we're careful. And on the knife files."
"But you have to trust me, and trust yourself."
He nodded, taking a deep breath.
He could feel the adrenaline rushing through him, making his hands slightly sweaty and his heart beat faster. She stepped onto the bridge first, moving carefully and confidently. He followed, gripping the ropes tightly, feeling the sway beneath his feet. Each step was a test of balance, courage, and focus. Halfway across, the bridge swayed more violently than he expected. He froze for a moment, heart racing, the wind whipping around him. She turned to him, her eyes wide but calm. "Keep moving," she said softly. "You can do this!" He took another deep breath, pushed forward, and soon reached the other side. The view was more stunning than he had imagined. Breaths. The valley stretched endlessly below, the trees glowing with colors of orange, red, and gold. The river sparkled like a ribbon of silver. He could hardly believe that such a place existed so close to their quiet town. For a moment he just stood there, taking it all in. The fear and tension melted into awe, and he felt a sense of accomplishment that was almost overwhelming. She stood beside him, smiling, her eyes reflecting the beauty of the scene. "You did it," she said, her voice soft but full of pride. "I knew you could." He smiled, feeling a mix of relief and exhilaration. But deep down he knew this was only the beginning. The challenge wasn't just the bridge or the cliff. It was what came next. He could feel that whatever he was about to do would be bigger, more daring, and it could shock not just them, but the town as well. As they explored the area, they found a small hidden cave at the edge of the cliff. Inside, the walls were smooth and cool, and it smelled faintly of earth and moss. The cave was small, just enough for two people to sit comfortably. She gestured for him to sit beside her. "There's something I need to tell you," she said, her voice serious now. "The choice you make here, it will change things."
Not just for you and me, but for everyone who knows us. He looked at her, heart racing.
What do you mean?" She hesitated, then said softly, "I mean that sometimes doing the right thing isn't easy, and sometimes the right thing feels wrong until you see the results. You have to decide if you're ready for that."
He felt a chill run down his spine.
The words were clear, but the meaning was deeper than anything he had experienced before. He realized that the next step wasn't just about courage. It was about choice, responsibility, and understanding the consequences of his actions. For a long moment, they sat in silence, the forest around them quiet and still. The tension between them was almost tangible, a mix of anticipation, fear, and excitement. He could feel her gaze on him, steady and challenging, and he knew she was waiting for him to decide. Finally, he spoke. "I'm ready," he said, his voice firm. "Whatever it is, I'll do it." Her eyes widened slightly, a mix of surprise and relief. She nodded, and for a moment the world seemed to hold its breath. They spent the rest of the day preparing for what he had agreed to do. It wasn't dangerous in a physical sense, but it was a risk in every other way, a test of courage, trust, and the limits of their friendship. Every small step felt significant, every glance charged with meaning. As the sun began to set, painting the sky in shades of pink, orange, and purple, they were ready. He could feel the adrenaline building, the same thrilling mix of fear and excitement that had pushed him across the rope bridge earlier. But this was different. This was bigger, more daring, and it would mark a turning point in both of their lives. Breath. He looked at her one last time, remembering her whisper from the first night. "Don't make this harder."
He understood now. She hadn't just been warning him about what was safe or unsafe.
She had been warning him about the choice itself, the one that would test him in ways he had never imagined. Taking a deep breath, he stepped forward, ready to face whatever came next. The next morning, the air around the cabin felt different. The forest outside seemed quieter than usual, as if it were holding its breath. He woke up with a mixture of anticipation and nervousness. Last night had been intense, and the memory of what he had done on the cliff and in the cave still echoed in his mind. He remembered her words clearly, whispered in that serious, almost haunting tone. "Don't make this harder." Now he realized just how much those words meant. She was already awake, sitting at the small table with the notebook again, scribbling quietly. But when she looked up and saw him, she smiled softly, but with a seriousness that reminded him of the gravity of their situation.
"You did well yesterday," she said. her voice calm but full of meaning.
Breath, I'm proud of you. He felt a small rush of pride, but it was mixed with a nervous tension. He knew what they had done would change everything, but potentially for the whole town. They spent the morning preparing to leave the cabin and return home. The walk back through the forest felt different now. Every step reminded him of the risk he had taken, the excitement he had felt, and the tension that had built between them. It was no longer just an adventure. It was something that had meaning beyond the thrill. By the time they reached the car, the sun was shining brightly, and the warmth of the day contrasted sharply with the nervous energy in his chest. He knew that once they returned to town, the reactions would begin. People would notice changes, rumors might start, and the quiet little life of the town would no longer feel the same. The drive back was mostly silent. He kept thinking about what had happened and how he felt. She glanced at him occasionally, offering small smiles or nods of encouragement, but she didn't speak much. He sensed that she understood how overwhelming it could be, returning to a place where everything was familiar but nothing would ever feel the same again. When they finally arrived in town, the streets were just as he remembered. Quiet, lined with familiar houses, and still carrying the comforting predictability of small-town life. But he knew it wouldn't stay that way for long. At first, things seemed normal. People waved as they passed, neighbors exchanged greetings, and life went on as usual. But subtle changes started almost immediately. He noticed the way some people glanced at him a little longer than usual, the way whispers seemed to follow him down the street, and the curious looks from those who knew him well. He felt their eyes on him everywhere he went. It wasn't long before the town began to react more openly. Small groups gathered on porches, discussing quietly but obviously about something new. Friends and family approached him with questions that started out casual but soon became pointed, probing, and curious. "What were you doing out there?" someone asked. "I saw the pictures on your phone. That bridge, the cliff. Are you crazy?" He tried to explain, but words felt insufficient. How could he describe the mix of fear, excitement, and accomplishment he had felt without sounding reckless or foolish? He realized that no matter what he said, people would interpret it in their own way. Some would admire him, some would question his judgment, and some would simply gossip. At school and in public places, he noticed the reactions multiplying. People whispered behind his back, stared when he walked by, and occasionally asked to hear the story directly. He realized quickly that his actions had become the center of attention, whether he liked it or not. She stood quietly by his side through it all, her presence calming yet firm. Breaths. She didn't interfere or try to explain away what had happened, but her eyes showed understanding. She knew the impact of their choices, and she allowed him to face it himself. That was part of the lesson. Courage wasn't just about taking the risk. It was also about owning the consequences.
Not everyone reacted negatively.
Some of the younger people in town looked at him with admiration, impressed by the daring and bravery he had shown. They whispered to each other about the adventure, eager to hear details, and some even asked him to show them the places he had visited. The contrast between admiration and judgment made him realize just how divided opinions could be in a small community. Even among his closest friends, reactions varied. Some were genuinely proud of him, praising his courage and the way he had embraced the challenge. Others were skeptical, warning him that taking such risks could backfire and questioning whether it was worth it. The tension in the town reflected the tension he had felt in the forest, and he knew that the choices of a few hours ago were now affecting many lives. Family members were harder to face. His parents expressed concern, worried about his safety and the potential judgment from others. They didn't scold him, but the worry in their voices was clear. They reminded him that courage was important, but so was responsibility, and he could feel the weight of their words pressing down on him. Despite all the reactions, he couldn't regret what he had done. The memory of the cliff, the rope bridge, and the cave filled him with a sense of accomplishment. He realized that sometimes the most meaningful experiences came with risk and discomfort. Courage wasn't about avoiding fear. It was about moving forward even when fear existed. In the evenings, when the initial buzz of gossip died down, he reflected on everything that had happened. Sitting in his room, he replayed the events in his mind. The quiet forest, the rope bridge swaying beneath his feet, the hidden cave, and the challenge she had given him. Each memory reminded him of the lesson he had learned, that taking a risk could change everything. And sometimes the consequences were bigger than expected. She remained a constant presence, supporting him silently. Their friendship had deepened in a way neither of them had anticipated. They had shared something extraordinary, something that would be remembered in the town for a long time. But more importantly, they had shared a lesson about courage, trust, and the complexity of choices. The town continued to react in different ways. Some people approached him directly, asking questions and showing curiosity. Others kept their distance, whispering behind closed doors and exchanging glances when he walked by. He realized that he had become a topic of conversation not because of fame, but because of the way people were fascinated by courage and risk, and by the way someone they knew had chosen to step beyond the ordinary. By the end of the week, things started to settle, though the reactions didn't fully disappear. People in town had begun to understand the story, to see that it wasn't recklessness but a deliberate choice made with courage and thought. The admiration from some people balanced out the criticism from others, and slowly he found a sense of equilibrium. He reflected on how much he had changed in just a few days. The adventure had taught him more than he expected, about himself, about courage, about trust, and about how a single choice could ripple through the lives of others. He understood now that the thrill of risk came with responsibility, and that facing the consequences was part of the experience. His friendship with her had also grown stronger. She had challenged him, guided him, and allowed him to take the risk while providing support. Their bond had deepened, rooted in trust, understanding, and shared experience. They had faced something together that few people could truly understand, and that connection would stay with them forever. The town, too, had been changed. People had seen someone take a risk, face fear, and handle the consequences with courage. Some were inspired, some were curious, and some were critical, but all had learned something about the value of choice and bravery. He realized that his actions, small as they might seem, had made a mark on the community, showing that even in a quiet town, extraordinary things could happen. As he lay in bed that night, reflecting on the events of the week, he felt a sense of peace. The whispers, the curiosity, and the admiration all formed a complex mix, but he had faced it all. He had stepped into the unknown, embraced the risk, and experienced something unforgettable. And he knew that life in the town would never be quite the same again.
He had learned that courage was not just about action, but about understanding the consequences and accepting them.
He had learned that friendship and trust could guide him through even the most challenging moments. And he had learned that sometimes taking a risk could open doors to experiences and growth that were impossible to predict. As he closed his eyes that night, he remembered her words, one last time. Don't make this harder. He understood now that the challenge wasn't just about the cliff, the bridge, or the cave. It was about life, choices, courage, and the way one decision could echo far beyond the moment, and he felt ready for whatever came next. The days after the events in the cabin passed slowly, yet they felt unusually full. Life in the small town continued, but the memory of what had happened seemed to linger in the air. People still whispered, glanced, and sometimes asked questions, but the intensity of the reactions had softened. The town was beginning to adjust to the fact that something remarkable had occurred, something that had shaken the quiet rhythm of their everyday lives. He woke up one morning with a sense of calm he hadn't felt before. The excitement and tension that had filled his chest for days were slowly giving way to reflection. But, sitting on his bed, he thought about the adventure, the rope bridge, the cliff, the hidden cave, and, most importantly, her whispered words.
Don't make this harder. He realized that she had been preparing him, guiding him without forcing him.
Allowing him to make his own choices while teaching a lesson about courage, responsibility, and trust. He walked outside and found her sitting on the porch swing, a blanket wrapped around her shoulders. The morning sun was soft, warming the cool air, and the town seemed peaceful, almost ordinary. But yet he knew that neither he nor the town would ever be the same again. "Morning," he said, sitting down beside her. "Morning," she replied, smiling. "I thought you might need a quiet moment." He nodded, appreciating her thoughtfulness. "Yeah," he said, "it's been
A lot. But in a good way. She looked at him knowingly.
I think that's exactly how you're supposed to feel, she said softly. You faced something scary, something new, and you learned more than you expected. That's what matters.
He thought about the town, about the reactions, the whispers, and the glances. At first it had been overwhelming. Some people had stared with disbelief, some with admiration, and some had criticized him quietly. It was strange to be at the center of attention, even for something that felt personal and private. But he realized that the experience had given him something far more valuable than approval or recognition. It had given him understanding about courage, about himself, and about the way choices ripple outward in ways he could never fully predict. Over the next few days, he noticed subtle changes in the town. People began to talk about what he had done in a more reflective way. The younger generation seemed inspired, curious, and even a little excited about what was possible beyond the ordinary routines of small-town life. While cautious, began to see that courage and careful risk-taking could be valuable, not reckless. The town was slowly learning that life didn't always have to follow the same predictable path, that stepping outside comfort zones could lead to growth and new experiences. He also noticed changes in himself, the black stain fragmented by the tower. The thrill of the adventure was still with him, but had been replaced by a sense of maturity, understanding, and pride in how he had handled the experience. Robert, he realized that true courage wasn't just about facing danger or taking risks. It was about understanding the consequences, trusting yourself, and accepting the responsibility that comes with your actions. Her presence continued to be a steady support. She didn't need to say much. Her quiet confidence, her understanding, and her shared experience reminded him of the bond they had strengthened over the past few days. Their friendship had deepened, built on trust, shared courage, and the knowledge that they had faced something extraordinary together. One evening, they walked together through the familiar streets of their town. The sun was setting, casting long shadows across the houses and streets. People waved as they passed, and a few approached to ask questions or share thoughts about what had happened. He answered as honestly as he could, careful to show respect for everyone's perspective. Some listened with admiration, some with curiosity, and some simply nodded and smiled politely. It was a balance that reflected the town itself, a mixture of caution, wonder, and acceptance. He realized that part of growing up and taking risks was learning to face both praise and criticism gracefully. Not everyone would understand his choices, and not everyone would agree with him. But what mattered most was that he had made a choice, faced the challenge, and handled the consequences with integrity. That was something no one could take away from him. They reached the park at the edge of town, a place where they had played as children. He sat on a bench, watching the trees sway gently in the wind, thinking about everything that had happened. The adventure at the cabin, the rope bridge, the cliff, and the hidden cave had all felt intense in the moment, but now, looking back, it felt transformative. It had changed him in ways that words couldn't fully capture. She sat beside him, quiet for a while. Then she spoke softly. "You've grown a lot these past few days, not just because of the adventure, but because of how you handled it afterward. That's the real test. Not the thrill, but what comes next." He nodded, understanding. The thrill had been fleeting, but the lessons, the courage, and the growth were lasting. He realized that the experience had taught him more about himself, about relationships, and about life than anything else he had done before. Over the following weeks, the story of their adventure became part of the town's quiet lore. People who had once whispered behind closed doors now spoke openly about it with admiration and curiosity. Younger kids asked questions, hoping to understand the courage it took. Older residents reflected on the story as a reminder that even in a small town, extraordinary things could happen, and people could rise to meet challenges they never imagined. He found himself invited to share his experience in small ways, at school, in community gatherings, and even casually with neighbors. Each time he did, he focused not on the thrill or the danger, but on the lessons learned: trust, courage, responsibility, and the value of stepping outside comfort zones while respecting boundaries. He wanted others to understand that bravery wasn't just about action. It was about thoughtfulness, preparation, and awareness.
Throughout it all, she remained by his side.
Their friendship had transformed into something deeper, a bond rooted in shared experience, trust, and understanding. They laughed together, shared quiet moments, and occasionally revisited the memories of the cabin, the forest, and the cliff. Those moments were theirs alone, a private reminder of courage, growth, and connection. He also noticed a change in himself that was subtler but more profound. He felt more confident in his choices, more aware of the impact of his actions, and more capable of facing challenges with calmness and clarity.
He had learned that taking risks was part of life, but so was handling the consequences with responsibility and grace.
One quiet evening, as they sat on the porch together watching the sun dip below the horizon, he reflected on everything that had happened. He thought about the whispers in the cabin, the challenges he had faced, the reactions of the town, and the lessons he had learned.
And he realized that the adventure was not just about him or the thrill. It was about growth, trust, and the courage to embrace the unknown.
Do you remember what I said the first night? She asked, a small smile on her face. He nodded, smiling back.
I do. Don't make this harder.
She laughed softly.
And yet you did. But you learned, didn't you?
You faced the challenge, handled it, and came out stronger. That's what mattered.
He realized she was right. He had ignored the warning in the moment, yes, but he had also grown because of it. He had taken a risk, faced fear, and learned to handle the consequences. The experience had shaped him, strengthened his bond with her, and even influenced the town in subtle ways. As night fell, the town quieted down. Life returned to a new kind of normal, one shaped by the courage and choices of a few days. He felt a sense of peace, knowing that he had done something meaningful, something that would remain in his memory forever. The lessons, the thrill, the fear, and the reflection were all part of the same journey, a journey that had changed him and those around him. And as he looked up at the stars that night, shining brightly over the quiet town, he knew one thing for certain: courage, trust, and thoughtful risk-taking were the true markers of growth. The adventure at the cabin was over, but its impact would last a lifetime. He closed his eyes and smiled, feeling a deep sense of satisfaction, knowing that he had faced fear, embraced the unknown, and learned the most important lesson of all: that life, like the forest around the cabin, was full of challenges, beauty, and opportunities for growth, and that he was ready for whatever came next.